Okay, so we'll get going. Let me just bring up the slideshow presentation. Okay, so good morning. So welcome to the presentation. The theme is driving financial planning and analysis efficiency. My name is Colm Kennelly. So I work for IBM, but I do a lot of work with business partners such as ProStrategy, and they have kindly invited me back, in fact, to present today. So just very quickly, the things that I hear from customers about their financial processes, the biggest issue that I hear from people is that their financial processes take too long. They take too long, really, because of the tools that they are using. The people that I talk to on a regular basis, they are looking to spend more time on analysis, less time manipulating spreadsheets and reports. They want to be able to create more forecasts, more scenarios, more quickly, and create better analysis. So the solution that we're going to look at today is called IBM Planning Analytics. Now, this slide summarizes, I think, pretty well what the key themes are of what it provides: speed, agility, and foresight. So the speed, which you'll see as we go through the demo, is really all about the in-memory engine, which supports quite large, quite complex, multi-dimensional data sets, giving you fast performance and real-time aggregations. There is support for Excel, which means you can retain a familiar interface. And we'll look at that as we go through the demo. And also there is, when we talk about foresight, through the access to things like Watson Analytics, business users can explore data in a guided way. They can uncover trends. They can use advanced analytics to understand what's driving good and bad performance. Okay. Yeah, so just before I move on, the one thing I did want to point out is that a number of use cases. So the theme of the webinar is driving financial planning and analysis efficiency. So my demo will focus really on that use case, which is all about incorporating actuals to set baseline targets, things like planning workflow, scenario modeling, all that kind of stuff. But it is important, I think, to point out that there are lots of use cases for the application that we're going to look at today. And one of them is financial control and reporting. And this is really all about, automating closing cycles, cutting down the time that it takes to close the books every month end, every quarter end, every year end, and improve reporting. So I will actually cover some of this at the end. And another use case that we can talk about is what ProStrategy called commercial finance and business partnering. And this is really, I suppose, about aligning the operations of the business and the finance side. So going behind the financial statements, looking at commercial performance by customers, by products, trying to understand who's doing well and who's doing badly, doing some analysis on that. And also doing things like allocating large volumes of data. So if we have allocations that we want to perform across products, across customers, doing all of that automatically. So very quickly, so coming back to the themes that I mentioned, the theme of speed. So as we go through the demo, what we will see are examples of how the in-memory engine helps us to work with the data better. So working with large data sets, creating new scenarios, new versions on the fly. And also things like analyzing and modeling multiple hierarchies. Now, this is a relatively new feature, but it's really quite powerful. It just means that we can analyze key dimensions in lots of different ways. Things like products and cost centers. We might want to model reorganizations, look at our products using a customer roll-up as well as a product type roll-up, that type of thing. So the agility really comes through the interfaces. We offer really a choice of 3 interfaces depending on what the user's requirements are. So the 3 interfaces are web, mobile, and Excel. And I'll talk briefly about those in a moment. We do also provide advanced business intelligence capabilities through integration with Cognos Analytics, or Cognos BI, as a lot of people will know it. So the web interface that I mentioned is called Planning Analytics Workspace. Now, I won't give too much away at this stage because we will see a lot of this in the demo, but the point I try and make to people up front is that it's really designed for all user roles. So if you're someone who just needs to look at some numbers and do some very basic interaction infrequently, it's designed for you. It's also designed for people who might have to input data and maybe create scenarios of the data. It's designed for people who might want to create content. So they might want to create views and reports and books either for themselves, or they might want to create those for other colleagues to work with. And it is also designed for people that need to maintain models and structures and rules, and they can do that all through the web interface. And we'll see that as we go through the demo. The other thing that we'll probably touch on a little bit, one of the goals of our product development people is that the workspace that we're looking at can provide what we would call the finished article as regards dashboards. So, you can make dashboards look very nice by customizing them with pictures, very graphical and very interactive. Okay. I will spend a fair amount of time in here as well. So looking at the tight integration with Excel. So the Excel add-in gives us a live link to our data with the ability to create highly formatted reports. And we can also use it as an interface for creating scenarios and performing data entry. Okay. I'll probably leave it there really in terms of the slides and jump straight into the demo. So I'm just going to go to my browser. So let's go ahead and look at the product. Yeah. And from my browser, I'm going to open up Planning Analytics. And I'm going to log on as somebody who's a fairly high level user. And I'm going to open up this workbook here that I've put together for this event called ProStrategy. And again, bearing in mind, it is designed for all user roles, like I said. So there's kind of something in here for everybody in terms of what their role is. And we will hopefully see examples as we go through the demo. Now, in this demo, I'm using the scenario of a clothing retailer who has got stores across Ireland. And for this particular use case, the financial planning and analysis use case, I'm going to use some of the challenges that a typical organization would have, when they were going through their planning process. So a typical organization like this, before having planning analytics, would do everything in spreadsheets. They would do the typical things. They would want to set targets at a high level and have those cascade down. But they would have a lot of challenges with those processes. Firstly, a clothing retailer can potentially have lots and lots of data at different levels. So they could have information at the store level, information down to the product level, SKU level, potentially 52 weeks of data across multiple years, and lots of versions and scenarios on the data. So the second challenge really is, how do they create, compare, and manage lots of different scenarios and versions? So we'll look at how planning analytics kind of dealt with some of those issues in that use case. Now, before I get into the detail, I do want to show an example of the type of output that can be created within planning analytics. So, from all the use cases I mentioned, be that planning, be that financial control, key outputs will be financial and non-financial metrics that managers can use to answer questions and to help make their decisions. And this is an example of a financial summary. And in fact, in all of these tabs here, what I've done, wherever you see this this mortarboard icon, if I click on that, it brings up some help text, and actually it's quite a useful way for me doing the demo. It just reminds me of the points that I need to make and what capabilities are available. So what this is telling me here, for my kind of financial analysis and reporting, I can click on any of these stores to filter the data. I can actually click on the button to load the latest actuals. And indeed, if I want to get behind a number, I can drill down and see how a number is made up, where it's coming from. And indeed, if I wanted to, I could download the view into Excel by clicking on one of the toolbar buttons. Okay, so that's quite a useful reminder for me of what I can do within here. So like I say, if I wanted to look at an individual store, I can click on that and the view updates pretty instantaneously. Now, in real life, we would have processes running in the background, running on a scheduled basis to bring in data from any number of underlying systems. And at the moment, this view here, my staff costs is 0. And I just wanted to demonstrate the interactivity, the functionality, the flexibility within Planning Analytics. If I want to run a process to load in some actual staff costs, it's run that process for me. And all I need to do up here is just refresh the view to see the data coming through. So I've now got my actual staff costs, 99,000 across the entire organization. If I go to an individual store, I can see it's part of that cost. If I'm interested in understanding that 9,900 euros, where did that come from? So by right clicking on that number and going to the drill through option, I can drill back to the staff details and I can see the components of that. So I can see the 3 employees, how that's made up, and I can see how that cost is made up from their pay and their PRSI. Okay. So again, that's just a very quick example of the type of output, the type of summary that we want to get when we've kind of gone through a planning or a forecasting cycle. So what I want to do now is kind of get back to the use case and look at how Planning Analytics was able to address some challenges around target setting, budgeting, etc. So here I have a view which I had forgotten to reset from when I last did my last rehearsal. So I just popped that back on there. This isn't actually part of the script as such. So if I were to just drop that on here, drop my products onto the rows. So what I'm trying to do here is to set some target figures, which at the moment, as you can see, is 0. And I want to do that across the entire sort of store hierarchy. So let's just do that here quickly. Okay. So to get some volumes, we've already got some actual data, some historic data. And by right-clicking on here, I can choose to spread data, which gives me a number of options. And in this case, I want to do what's called a relative proportional spread. So I want to take some values, in this case, my actual data, set some targets relatively and proportionally to that. So my actual volumes were 1,050,000. I'm going to start with a target of 1 million. Just type in 1M and apply that to my target figures, to my products, to my stores. So it's dropped in the million for me. Now, I had already dropped in some average transaction values or selling prices or whatever you want to call them. And then it's worked out that times that will give me sales of 20 million euros. Okay. Now I know from experience that, or I know from talking to the management team, that they like to test out and compare different scenarios. So on top of the base figures, I know that they might want to see, well, we want to kind of drive up the women's wear sales. If we make those changes, how would that compare to the base? So I can do that very quickly and easily by creating what's called a sandbox or a personal scenario. So I'm going to create one, and I'm going to call it push for women's wear, or just give it a meaningful name so I can understand what it is and create that. And now I think, well, I don't expect us to sell anymore in terms of the volume, so I'd like to hold that number. But I'd like to work out what our prices would need to be to get us to a sales value of 8 million. Okay. So now that's worked out what my prices would need to be. And if I want to, I can look at this in lots of different ways. I could maybe see the impacts on stores, for example, on the sales. I might decide, well, I've created this scenario. I'd like to be able to compare that to the base. And by clicking on this ellipsis, In fact, it was already on there. If I just drop the sandbox into the columns, I can now see that I'm not sure what's happened there. Sorry. Drop that back on there. Okay. Just going to create one more because I should be seeing a difference on there. In fact, let me just make that 7 million. Hopefully that will make the point. Okay, so sorry, user error there. We'll have to move on from that. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that these scenarios can be created on the fly by authorized users. We can start with very high levels of data and cascade those back over the underlying numbers, see those break back across individual products, individual stores. Okay. Okay, so that's on the scenario piece. Now, having set targets, the next challenge that this organization had was really planning for new stores. So, we already have a hierarchy in place. We have, our stores rolling up into high street, lifestyle, etc. So that's the business as is. But like most organizations, we expect that to change over time. For this particular organization, being a retailer, one way they would look to drive growth would be by opening new stores. That's a very simple way for them to do that. Okay. And opening stores that would, they don't exist today. They may not be there at the start of the financial year. They will open up at some point through the financial year. And as you can imagine, doing something like that is, generally that proves to be quite difficult because it means you've got to maintain and modify and create potentially a large number of spreadsheets to make sure that that's all working correctly. So let's look at how planning analytics helps address that challenge. So here I have a view that allows me to input various parameters about a new store. That would include things like we'll give it an ID that will be recognized in the system by, give it obviously a meaningful name. In this case, it's going to roll up into, we can choose whether it's a high street or a lifestyle type store. I'm also going to say that it's going to open up in week 6. It's not going to be there at the start of the year, but we will need to start planning for it being open through the year. And the other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to assign this to the region called South, and the reason for that should become apparent later in the demo. So I'm going to hit the Run button, and that's gone and it's gone and done that for me. So a number of things have happened. It's gone and added Cork into the store hierarchy and the store workflow. So let me just refresh that. So I've now got the ability to start planning for that store and managing all the workflow around that. But also it has updated the entire model in real time. So all of my reports, and we'll see this shortly, all of my reports are up to date as well. And you can imagine for organizations like this, having this kind of approach to managing hierarchies and dimensions, that saves countless hours compared to doing it, let's say, using spreadsheets. Okay, so let's look at some of the budgeting aspects. While we're in here, just click on the mortarboard to remind me of how this is helping me. Companies like this they're looking to plan more often. They're looking to involve more people in the process. How can we help people do that? Well, one obvious way is by having the workflow visibility. So just by seeing where we are in the process, just by seeing who's holding up the process, we can take action against people who are holding up the process. And just that alone, just by having the visibility, can reduce planning cycle times by, we've seen it up to 50% in some customers. The other thing which helps with that is the concept of instant aggregation. So whenever we make any changes to the data, whenever we update targets, whenever we update budget assumptions, changes are immediately visible throughout the entire model. So that's a little bit on the kind of what we're trying to achieve here. When we're doing the planning, when we're doing the budgeting and the forecasting inputs, there's a lot of flexibility that we give to the end users. Now, for example, we could go in and plan for individual stores, but if I'm the manager for the high street stores, I might want to look at them all side by side when I'm doing my planning, rather than have to go in and update them and review them individually. And as a user, I'm not stuck to this particular view. So even though this has been set up, let's say, by a finance person, I want to see it differently. I want to see my stores in the rows, and I actually want to see my products in the columns. I don't necessarily want to look at all of these weekly periods. I'm looking at version 1. That's the current version that we're planning for. Again, there's a big old hierarchy of products, which is a little bit unwieldy from a planning point of view. Maybe I just want to focus in, and I'm just thinking about planning for shoes across men's, women's, children's, and maybe I just want to create a sub-consolidation on the fly of those products. So now I've got a view which is a bit more meaningful and a bit more personal to me. Maybe I want to see it graphically as well. And maybe as a user, I want to create my own scenario. I want to create column sandbox. Okay. And I might want to plan for my volumes across these products. And I think overall for shoes across all of these stores, I want to add 1,000 units, and then slice back and see what that will do for my sales plan. Okay. So a lot of flexibility for end users to do their own budgeting and planning. If I'm happy with that, I can commit the numbers, and these are the numbers that get kind of aggregated up and seen by everybody else up the hierarchy. Okay, so that's just a little bit on some of the flexibility that you get from that we give to budget holders to do their own planning. And we can go through multiple iterations and reviews of this, and then once we're finished with version 1, the next challenge is going to be how do we set up and how do we manage version 2. And again, this is a big challenge for most organizations. Whenever between versions of the budgets, whenever the assumptions change, it's very difficult to communicate this to budget holders. It's very difficult to send out revised models in an efficient manner, in a timely manner, for them to do their second iteration of the plan. So here's how we helped this organization. I've got a view here which allows me to manage my budget versions. And again, the mortarboard just explains and reminds me what we can do within here. I can create, store, compare unlimited planning versions. So they can be created quickly and easily by obviously authorized users. Only administrators or modelers would have this capability. But also, in addition to copying the data, where we're collecting input from people, that'll be automatically reflected. Where we have reports which are actual versus current budget version, they'll be updated automatically. So it's actually doing quite a lot. So even though when I hit the run button and add version 2, all that's doing is just adding in a placeholder into the model for me. That's kind of the easy bit. But the second step then, when I run the process to copy all the data from version 1, and this will take a few seconds to run that process, copy the data from version 1 into version 2. But it's copying all of the data around all of the data by store, by week, by product. If I have payroll data that it's using, all that's getting copied across. All of my cost of sales assumptions are getting copied across. So it's really quite powerful in terms of what it's doing. And just to quickly kind of visualize and see that in action, if I go to, let's say, my budgeting assumptions, where I've got my assumptions around the cost of these products, I've now got the ability to look at and update version 2 and maybe change the assumptions. I think that this product is going to be cost €2.20 from then on, for example. Yeah, I can update my assumptions if I'm a budget holder who's using the workflow capabilities. And if I open up, let's say, the plan for Cork as an example, we're now looking at version 2 with the same base set of data that we had at the end of version 1. Okay, so that ability to add new versions, to copy data, is really quite powerful. It cuts down huge amounts of manual error-prone tasks that need to happen every budget iteration. Okay, so that's quite a key piece of the planning and forecasting use case. Okay, now, so that's really kind of everything in terms of the planning and the forecasting. I do want to move on now to the theme of analytics, and I want to look at the concept of hierarchies. And this really applies across all of our use cases. Yeah. So, up until now, we have been looking at effectively one version of the store hierarchy. Yeah. So we had Kinsale, Athlone, and the new store in Cork rolling up into High Street, and we had Waterford and Rosslea rolling up into Lifestyle. And you remember when I added Cork, I assigned it to the region South, so it's populated out in here. And the reason for that was to allow me to summarize and indeed analyze my data that particular way. So I haven't yet created the hierarchy for region, and I'm going to do that now just by right-clicking on that column heading and saying create hierarchy, and it just says, are you sure you want to do this? And yes, I am. Okay. So it now takes those base level stores, and let me just display the store name, and it's now rolling those up in a different way. So it's the same base level set of items, just rolled up in a different way. And I can see that here, but actually I think that the best way to visualize this is really just to get a view of my store P&L. And in fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch to edit mode, and I'm just going to remove this from the view. I don't need to work with this anymore. And we're starting to get into some of the self-service capabilities, which I'll come on to in a moment. But I have bookmarked a summary called the hierarchy view, which I'm just going to bring into the workspace. And that's looking at what I would call the natural hierarchy. But if I want to look at those stores rolled up by region, which I've just created, I can drag that into here, maybe look at that across in the rows or the columns, maybe start planning based on this new roll-up structure. So quite a powerful feature really across all of the use cases. It means that you can have your products, your customers, your cost centers, your companies rolled up using what I would call a natural hierarchy, but there will be other ways that you need to cut and slice and dice the data. And that's something that's very, very easy to do out of the box using planning analytics. Okay. And again, coming back to the point I made about the workspace being for all users, this is effectively an administrator modeler type function. Again, it's available to me within this browser-based workspace. Okay, so as I said, I've started to sort of touch on some of the self-service capabilities. Let's explore that a little bit more now. Okay, I'm just going to jump to what is effectively a blank tab on here. And again, just to remind myself, if I click on the mortarboard icon, it says if I click on the edit button, I can type in a query such as this one. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste that. So if I click on the edit button, type in menswear volumes version 1, version 2, whatever, hit enter. It's going off, it's looking at my data, it's saying, okay, well, in various parts of the model, in particular in this store P&L, I have found menswear volumes version 2 of 341,620. And that's really good. It's just kind of the terms I put in on the fly. Version 1 I added a moment ago, so it doesn't have to run any indexing or anything. It's just looking at the live data, and I can bring that in as a starting point. So that's quite good, but it might be interesting to see this by store, for example. And right now it's only looking at basically the terms I've asked it for, but behind the scenes there are things like store, period, sandbox, etc. So I can add those into the analysis very quickly. And maybe I want to see this by store, so I could drag store into the columns. And again, it's giving me the full hierarchy of stores, which is a bit unwieldy. So I can change the selection just to look at it by, summarize it by location type. And maybe I want to look at it, instead of looking on a rolling 12-month basis, maybe I want to look at that for the year of 2017. And, actually I want to see the stores maybe in the rows, for example. I can swap it. I can swap it back, maybe look at the product group level. So instead of looking at just menswear, I want to look at women's wear, children's wear. And maybe I want to look at it by version as an example. So looking at version 2. Okay. And possibly, maybe it'll stand out a lot better if I were to look at this graphically, let's say as a column chart. Right. So again, as a user, an end user, I can customize, change the view into something which is much more personal, much more meaningful to me. And I started off with effectively a blank page. Okay. The other thing I'm going to show while I'm in here, kind of the last piece on the use case before I move into financial closing and reporting. If I want to combine Excel reports that I've authored already, and in fact, here's one I made earlier. I've got an Excel report which is called Store P&L Summary. And this, I think, demonstrates a couple of things. It demonstrates the fact that, if we've already got Excel authored content that we've created, and I will create one of these for you shortly, we can combine it with non-Excel content, such as these graphical views. That's the first thing. I think as well, it kind of speaks a little bit to that use case of combining financial and operational views of the data. Whereas this one is probably more of I would say, an operational view. Let me just minimize that looks a bit better. Whereas this is more of a financial view. So that's the first thing. And the other thing, which I think is also quite interesting, if I want to make this a little bit more interactive and user-friendly, a good example here would be, I want to be able to choose a store and have both of these views update automatically without having to go and do it for both. And that's quite easy to do. Again, over here, when I go to my content, if I go to my bookmark, I've got a store selector that I've already bookmarked. I'm going to bring that in as a selector widget. And the last thing I'm going to do is on each of these views, so on my store P&L, I'm going to synchronize that by store and period. And I'm going to do the same over here. Yeah, so that if I choose high street stores, let me just come out of here for a second, then you can see both the Excel authored view and the graphical widget that I've added in both update at the same time. Okay. So again, just to recap on that, I started with a blank page. I typed in the query of what I was looking for. I was able to add in further context. I was able to personalize that view into something that I actually wanted, something more meaningful. I then combined it with some pre-authored Excel content. And then I was able to filter both of those on a common dimension so that they both updated. And really what I've done is I've built a mini dashboard in the space of about 5 minutes. And if you have more time and more content, you can begin to imagine the sorts of content that can be created. Okay, so we've looked in some detail at the financial and operational planning use case. We've branched out into a little bit more on the analytics and the self-service. I do want to conclude by just looking in a little bit more detail at financial control and reporting. Okay, and I've actually created a separate book for this, similar to the one we've been looking at, but it's focused on financial control and reporting. And I'm sure you'll remember from my slides that the two main themes from the financial control and reporting use case were really around a faster financial close and taking advantage of existing Excel skills. So, the faster close can be achieved by I guess automating many aspects of the process. And then I will finish the demo by showing how to use Excel as a real-time reporting tool on the data. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the faster close. So let's have a look at data capture. So here again, I'm using workflow to help me manage. In this case, it's a monthly submission process rather than an annual planning cycle. And in this example, I'm only waiting on one particular entity. In this case, I'm waiting on Dublin Direct for their numbers. So let's open it up, and you'll see what this allows me to do. And this is shows me a template really that allows me to capture the required data. Now, this is a really simplified process. This is a three-step process for capturing data from the entities, but obviously in real life it could be much more detailed. So the first thing I need to do is to load monthly actuals from my general ledger. So I'm just going to hit the run button, and that then populates the GL value column of this particular template. Now, this is an example of how we can automate, key processes. In real life, we can have any number of data feeds. Again, in real life, they'll probably happen on a schedule, but I'm just showing you on demand how it can work as well. So having loaded some GL data, I can enter my adjustments. So I think, well, actually the GL value isn't quite correct. I need to adjust that upwards of 50. And then I can type in a comment, because I'm sure I'll get asked about my adjustment. So I'm going to type in a comment to say this is a reversal from period 12 or whatever it needs to be. So we can capture all of that data, the GL value, any manual adjustments. We can then see what the reported actuals will be versus our budget and any variances coming off that. But once I'm satisfied, I can commit that information and then submit it. And in this case, when I submit it, what that means is it now goes to locked. So that particular submission is locked. No further changes can be made unless and until an authorized user rejects that. Okay, so now that all of my units have submitted, I do want to do a bit of reporting and analysis on the data. And as you have seen, I can show that very quickly here. As you saw earlier, any changes that I make are automatically reflected throughout the system. So if I look at this report, which is showing all of my companies and filter it on Dublin Direct, then my adjustment and my comment is coming through. And this is one of the key ways that helps us with this concept of a fast close. But supposing that I wanted to create a new formatted report, a brand new report that I haven't created already, then I would argue that Excel is the ideal interface for that. So I'm going to launch Excel. And I'm going to connect to the data. So you'll see I've got my IBM Planning Analytics toolbar, which makes it easy for me to connect to and work with my data. And I'm going to open up the model that we've been looking at in the last couple of minutes. Now, it needs to know who I am. And obviously that will govern what I can see within the data. And there's various ways I can work with this. I could open an existing view. I could create a new view from scratch. And in fact, one of the really good ways of creating a view from scratch is start by creating a blank exploration. And then in my data model over here, this financial metrics view, this is made up by company, metric, period, version, And the easiest way to do this is to go to existing subsets of these, such as I want to see all my financial metrics in the rows. And in the columns, I want to see either all my versions, or maybe I just want to see my reporting versions. Yeah, so it's built that view for me. And the other thing I might want to do is to filter this on my companies, so I can drag that into the context area. And actually, it's looking at the Asia channel. I want to look at total company. Very simple, very fast, very powerful. Yeah. Maybe I want to see the companies in the rows. I can look at it that way. Spin it any way that I want to. Instant response. Now, this is showing me all the levels in the hierarchy. So this is Asia and all of the items that make it up. I could have a subset where that's already defined. So I could drag in regions in total so that it's summarized to begin with. And then if I choose to, I can drill up and down on individual levels. That's quite a nice way to look at it. In actual fact, I think the request, let's say my management wants to see it with the financial metrics in the rows, and they want to see by region, they want to see actual budget variance. And that's a nice, quick and simple way to create that report. Yeah. So again, we start with a blank page, but this time we're using Excel as the interface. We're using drag and drop, a nice, simple, clean interface to create some reports and analysis. So that's one way to work with it. Start with a blank page and create it. I guess the second way to work with it is you could work with an existing view of the data. So in fact, I'm going to create a new, start off with a blank workbook again. And I know that I've got a view of this data, which is called summary financials. Now, before I commit to it, I can open this in the viewer and think, well, actually, what's this going to look like before I drag it in? And that looks pretty good, actually. That's pretty much what I wanted. Create an expiration. And I've now got that within here to start working with. And again, if I can choose this on, I could filter this in different levels. But actually, this is pretty much a good starting point for me to create a formatted report that I'm going to share with colleagues. So my next step, is to convert this to a custom report on this sheet. Okay, so I've now got a custom report, and I'm now pretty much in the world of Excel. Yeah, so what would I do within here? First thing I would do would be to, I don't like grid lines, so I tend to get rid of those. I'm not entirely happy with these borders, so to begin with, I'm just going to have no borders, and then I'll add my own selectively. I would typically just add in a bit more space, so just to give me a bit of room on top to do things like just to put a bit of text in, because I probably want that to stand out a bit more, make that a bit larger, make that like a 16-point font. Maybe highlight some of these numbers by spacing them out, just inserting blank rows. I'm in the world of Excel. I'm using Excel capabilities now, etc., etc. And then possibly, make that a bit nicer on the eye. I think right aligning that. I think conditional formatting on the variances, that kind of thing. You get the picture. So obviously I can spend a lot of time on the Excel formatting, but if I'm happy with this is something that I want other colleagues to have access to. So I can, rather than, in the old days, I'd have just saved this as an Excel file and maybe emailed it to somebody. But now I'm going to publish this up into a central secure area on the server. And I've got an area for reports. I'm going to call it new store PL. Or new, in fact, it's not a store PL anymore, is it? It's just a new PL. And I'm going to make it public. So anybody with access to this folder will also be able to open this report. When they run the report, it'll recognize their security. They'll only see what they're entitled to see. Okay, so that's creating a report in Excel very, very quickly. And like I say, my colleagues can choose to work with that. But I may have other colleagues who want to actually look at that. They're happy to use it via the browser. So again, if I just go to a blank page, and as I said earlier, any Excel authored content that we've created, we can work with in the workspace. We don't have to reinvent it or rewrite it. I'm going to bring that into here. Same report I just created. And as a final step, I'm going to bring in the ability to filter that on my companies that I've gone to the trouble of creating. So just go here, synchronize that by company and by period. Okay, so we're coming near the end of my piece. I just want to kind of really recap on the three broad capabilities of planning analytics. Yeah, speed, agility, and foresight. So the in-memory engine supporting large, multi-dimensional data sets. We've seen me work with large data sets, both from the point of view of target setting, but also analyzing and reporting on the data. We've seen me import data in real time in the financial close and reporting use case. We've seen some of the foresight in terms of being able to explore the data, uncover trends, and we've seen the agility in the interfaces. We've seen how the flexibility of the workspace with the self-service capabilities and the fact that it's designed for all user roles, from people who are just inputting numbers right up to administrators. But we've also seen that for users who are more comfortable using Excel, they can use it as a real-time window into their data, create content, from nothing in seconds, get fast response to the data, but also publish and share that with colleagues, and also for reuse come the next planning cycle or the next reporting cycle. So that's everything that I really wanted to show. Apologies for the gremlins at the start, but I hope it was a good use of your time in the end. I've tried to cover a lot, because there is a lot to cover. As I said up front, the theme was around driving financial planning and analysis efficiency, but I think it would have been remiss of me not to cover the financial close and reporting use case, as well as the other use cases. So I guess we have about 5.5 minutes if anybody has any questions. Okay, so I don't think anybody has any questions. Again, so I guess really to wrap up, thank you for your time. I hope it was a good use of an hour of your time. You've got 5 minutes back. The demo is being recorded. It will be put up on the ProStrategy YouTube channel. So if you did have colleagues who couldn't make it, but you'd like them to kind of just have a flavor of what we covered, that will be made available. And I'm sure the guys in ProStrategy will follow up with you in due course anyway. So thank you very much, and goodbye.